I press record.
Great, wonderful. And now you're all set?
Yeah, great.
I guess I'll sit here.
Yeah, if you sit, then those people can see.
Good afternoon, everyone. To the people here and the many people online as well, chiming in from all over, probably all over planet Earth, given the way technology goes these days. My name is David Rossmarin. I'm the director for the Center for Anxiety, which has offices both here and in Manhattan. I'm very excited today for this talk to present Dr. Regine Galanti, who's the director of this office here in Brooklyn. Dr. Galanti is a maven when it comes to child, she's not going to tell you any of this, so I have to. When it comes to child anxiety disorders, but also behavioral issues in children, we have the only PCIT parent-child interaction treatment facility in the entire borough of Brooklyn, I believe, in our office right behind you. You're all welcome, people who are here anyway, to take a look, and the people who aren't here, you're welcome to come and take a look when you like. And that's a program that Dr. Galanti leads here, helping parents to have a closer relationship with their kids and also to parent much more effectively in dealing with behavioral issues. So you're about to learn a ton of information. I hope you brought notepads. If you didn't, we have pens and paper for anybody who's here, and ask lots of questions and take in the opportunity that you have to hear from probably the best child psychologist in the borough. Okay.
So thank you. I think that was a little bit overstated, so sorry if David got your expectations too high. But what I'm going to talk about today is techniques really to positively and effectively discipline your child. So, sure, yeah. Paper and pen. Make sure it gets up so everyone has it. And you can keep the pen. And the orange pens, the Center for Anxiety pens. They're good pens, except they're blue, and that's surprising because they seem like they should be black, but that's just me. That's neither here nor there. Anyway, so back on topic. What I want you guys to learn today is a clearer understanding of what discipline is and how it can work, and appropriate limits. Some of the different styles of parenting, which I think is really important to sort of frame our discussion to know where we'd be going, and also some appropriate positive discipline techniques. Because I think often when we think about discipline, we think about punishment. And I think that there's way more to discipline than punishment, and actually way more to effective discipline than punishment. So my focus today is going to be a lot on the positive discipline techniques rather than the punishment side. But I'm happy to talk afterwards to anyone who wants to know more. And if you feel like you didn't get what you wanted, I'm sorry. But I think it'll help anyway. Bear with me. It's a little bit harder, but it'll still work out. So, not going there yet. Why do children misbehave? This is sort of open question. People online, you're welcome to chime in. And Malka is manning a different computer. Let me know what you say. Why do kids misbehave? Attention. So that's the first thing that everybody says. And I think that accounts for a lot of behavior problems, but not all. Why else?
To learn, to see what they.
So like curiosity.
Tired,
Tired, hungry. That's a big one that people overlook. My kids all the time. If they did not sleep enough, they are going nuts. It's normal. Why else? Yeah. So something's going on and they're acting out. Has nothing to do with what you're doing and, sort of what they're doing, but they're showing it that way because they have limited sort of resources because they're kids. So they're trying to tell you something in a way that maybe as an adult you wouldn't tell someone something that way. Would be interesting, right? If you walk into a room and like an adult threw a full-blown temper tantrum because something happened at home. But we don't really do that. Yeah. Yeah. So actually, I see that a lot with the anxious kids that we see here, that a lot of times if they're given inconsistent expectations, they'll act out because acting out has consistent consequences and they know what'll happen. If they're not sure what I wanted, then just launching this pen across the room will get a consistent response, yelling, screaming, whatever it is, versus like, dealing with their anxiety is just very overwhelming for them, so they'll act out instead. So I really like the inconsistent expectations. It's not when I'm laughing at something.
Frustration, anger, or coping with the anger.
Yeah.
And also maybe modeling other children that they grow up with after the tension.
Yeah. Yeah. So learning from others. I used to say that my kid was really well behaved until she started school, and not even in terms like you learn all these other things from other kids. So that's definitely true also, and emotional reasons. Kids do act out because of emotional reasons. So another need for control. Yep, they want to control the situation. They want to be in control, so they are trying to do so in a way that's inappropriate to us. Um, so I think those are all valid. I think we covered most of them. Family crisis is another one which we sort of covered what you said with something else going on. Like if things are chaotic at home, a kid might act out in another situation to get attention, to get something they want, tired. Power is really control. I have them really separately. I don't know why I did that. If they're sick, um, anxiety, curiosity, hunger, boredom. So I think we really did a good job of covering all of them. Good job, guys. So now we know why kids misbehave. So what do we want to do with that? So I want to back up for a minute and talk about, in order to understand parental response to misbehavior, I think it's a good idea to understand the different styles of parenting that one might have. So according to the research, a researcher named Baumrind looked at parenting styles, and he really came up with 3 styles that you might have. 2 are styles that we don't really want to have, and then there's one gold standard. So we'll talk about the ones that are not as effective first for various reasons. So I apologize in advance. The names are authoritarian, authoritative, and permissive. And authoritarian and authoritative sound the same, but they're very different. So you're warned. So authoritarian. An authoritarian parent is a parent that has a lot of demands, but very little wants. It's the parent who's saying, do what I say because I'm your parent. This kind of parent is going to stress obedience and order and really discourage independence and individuality. It's really much do what I say. There's not really so much give and take, and the rules aren't formed together with the children. They're much more like obey me because that's what you're supposed to do. It's more to the tiger mom that was in fashion a couple of years ago. That's an authoritarian parent. Kids who grow up in this structure, they definitely could be worse off. They do well in school typically because the parent is stressing doing well in school. They're not the kids who are gonna engage in a lot of antisocial behavior. They're not gonna, burn their cats or something else really inappropriate. But it also doesn't promote individuality very much because it's not about being who you are. It's about being what I say you should be. So these kids can be anxious and withdrawn, and they don't do so well when they're frustrated. So we don't want to go with authoritarian parenting. But then you also have the other extreme. By the way, if you have questions at any time, just interrupt me. It's fine. So the other extreme is the permissive parent. Permissive parents are warm, but there are very few demands. So there's really no guidelines or rules or consequences, very little structure. It's the way this parenting model is often described as really freedom without limits. So that's also not good. It seems great. Okay, that's the kid as a kid you might want to hang out in their parents' house because you can get away with anything. But that's also not good for the children. They often end up being rebellious or defiant. They're not good at regulating their emotions. Well, how do you handle anger? What do you do when you're angry? They're not so good at that. They give up pretty easily. They have low persistence in a task, and they tend to be immature and low self-esteem. So they'll often test their parents, like, what's it going to take to get you to give me rules?
Is it possible that children that are this and that, like it could be upside down, or
the child stuff, the stuff we know about kids of these parents, it's all correlational, meaning there are no studies that say, what if I make the parent behave in exactly this way? What will happen? Because that's probably unethical to tell, like for an experimenter to say, I want you to parent your child with very little warmth and these specific rules. So we're looking at what we have, and the children of these types of parents tend to be like that, but we don't know if it's causal. We don't know if being that kind of parent causes that. We just know that they're associated. And whenever we look at any kinds of psychology research, I guess this is just a good note when you look at psychology research. It's forgot what I totally lost my train of thought right there. Hold on while I get it back. What? Yeah, I remember correlational. Yeah, sorry, I don't remember what I was going to say. If it comes back to me, I will let you guys know.
Psychology research in general.
Yeah.
Adults are generally can
Oh, yes, that's where I was going. Thank you. Exactly. You can't apply what we know about the group to the individual. An individual is an individual. So even if that's true for the average person, you're not the average person. I don't know if you guys ever read The Phantom Toll Booth. It's all about, like, I'm getting a lot of blank stares, but it's a really cute kids book. Definitely check it out. But there's a lot of like talk of like, oh, this family has 3.2 children and 1.24 cars, so it's good because the 0.2 of the child gets to ride the 0.4 of the car. That's like what happens when you look at averages. It discounts the individual. So for every, if the average family size is 3, that means there's going to be families with no kids and families with 7 kids. So knowing the average family size is 3 doesn't tell you anything about that individual. So that's true of these types of parenting also. You can have very well-adjusted kids who are raised in authoritarian or permissive homes. But on average, this is what we're seeing. So I'll take a step back from being that kind of professor and go back to talking about parenting. So third parenting style is authoritative, and this is the one we're aiming for. This is a parent who basically has it all, high in warmth, but also demands. So there are reasonable standards, and those reasonable standards are enforced consistently, and it's a democratic relationship. So meaning you're going to tell your kid, you need to be home by 10, and they say, no, Mom, but the party's not over till 10:30. Is that okay? And you think about it, and you say, yeah, that makes sense. It's not 10 because I said so, and it's also not, no, you can stay out however late you want to. But if you do show up after 10:30, there's probably going to be a punishment. But if you show up at 10:35 and you say, sorry, we got stuck in traffic, then there might not be, because it's more reasonable. Children of this type of parent, on average, are happier and self-confident, are able to regulate their emotions well, and have good social skills. So that's really our goal. We want to be authoritative parents. We want to set reasonable standards for our children, promoting independence and individuality, and enforcing rules consistently. So how do we get there? So now to move a little bit, back to misbehavior for a minute, I want to talk about what often happens with misbehaving children. Not in all cases. Obviously, some kids are just going to misbehave sometimes, and that's great. But often with challenging children who are misbehaving often, the children and their parents are stuck in this cycle of downward negativity. So the child acts out, and that's what this little circle-y thing is supposed to represent, downward spiral of negativity. The child acts out, and the parent who has had enough because this kid did this yesterday and the day before acts, either threatens or provides some harsh consequence. But the kid thinks, wait, that's not fair, and you always respond like this, and what's he going to do? Do it again. And then the parent responds even more harshly, which makes the child even more resentful, which makes the parent respond negatively again. And how do you get out of that? Like, there's a lot of reasons why that might start, but once you're stuck in it, it's hard to get out of it, because this is when your child starts to sort of grate on your nerves, and you stop being as positive to your child. You might love them still, but they're driving you nuts. So you're going to be shorter. You're going to, be quicker to punish. You might not give as many warnings. You might not be just giving as much positivity as you would to a child who's not misbehaving. So it's very hard to get out of this. We'll talk about how there are ways, so that's good in the flow of what I'm going to focus on. So what I do in therapy here and in parent-child interaction therapy, which I know Dr. Rasmussen mentioned, that one of the therapies we do here is all about reversing this negative cycle. And I think good discipline is also about reversing this negative cycle, where instead of the parent responding harshly, what the parent is going to do is provide approving and consistent feedback to the child, which can be very difficult with a child who's trying your nerves. And in response, if you do that enough, you're going to get positive child responses. And once the child responds positively, the parent's going to provide more consistent and approving feedback, which allows the child to then have more positive responses, and you reverse the cycle. So instead of a downward negative cycle, you're talking about an upward positive cycle, that's our goal. So, what? Oh, I'm sorry. We're gonna have to wait for that to end. My email rings these days. I don't know how. It's not even worth dealing with. It'll end. Yeah, okay, done. Fine. Elaborate more on which part? Oh, so I'm going to talk about that. That's going to be like the main focus of what I'm going to talk about for the next 40 minutes. So when you're using effective discipline, we want to teach our children what to do, not what not to do. And I even phrase it like that, what to do, because I really do think focusing on the positive, and that's not always about being positive. It's more focusing on what your child does right, and the opposite of a negative behavior, which I'll explain the difference in a few minutes, helps rather than talking about what they shouldn't do. Because we spend a lot of time telling our kids what not to do, and we don't spend as much time telling them what they should be doing. So effective discipline can do that. It's going to teach problem solving, which helps children figure out how to get their own needs met. Funny story, a couple weeks ago, I was at my parents' house with my kids, and my 6-year-old was having a very hard day in terms of telling on all her cousins. So she kept on running into the room and being like, my cousin did this. And I just look at her and I'm like, is this tattletelling or problem solving? And she'd look at me and go, and then walk out of the room and like deal with it herself. And this happened like multiple times. And my mother was shocked that it worked. And I was also kind of surprised. Sometimes you're surprised even when what you're doing, what you know works, and it works. But she's used to me saying, okay, you know how to fix this, then let's figure out how. And she was able to internalize that, and that's great, which is another thing that we want to do with discipline. We want to help children internalize appropriate action. And when you do all that, it's going to enhance self-esteem. And the other thing we want is also to teach children appropriate interaction. So how to deal with, how to interact with other adults, how to interact with teachers, how to interact with peers. So good discipline is going to allow a child to do all that. So how do we get there? First step in getting there is, even starts before discipline, is understanding development. I know that's hard because as a child psychologist, this is what I do all day, so I sort of have a leg up on this. But get one of those general parenting books that tells you exactly when a milestone is supposed to be. I think we all do this for babies, and then it sort of falls off as they hit 1, and you sort of figure it out. It's really helpful to understand development in order to understand what's appropriate to ask from a child. Because what you never want to do is discipline a kid for something that they're developmentally incapable of doing. So if you're going to say, oh, something like, I brought my 2-year-old to school and they couldn't sit nicely the whole time. Like, of course not, because a 2-year-old can't sit nicely for 3 hours. You're setting yourself up for failure. Don't set yourself up for failure. Again, if you tell your 3-year-old, please tie your shoe, again, it's going to be a losing battle because they probably can't, because that's a fine motor skill that's not developed yet. So by understanding development, you'll be able to better know what milestones your child should be hitting and know what's appropriate. The same thing happens often with taking your kids out on multiple errands, adult errands, all day, and then expecting them to behave. The first one, if they're great, you say, okay, let me push my luck, take them on the second one. It just might not be appropriate. So by understanding development, it'll give you that lens to be able to provide good discipline for your children. So that being said, what is positive discipline and how does it work? So when I say positive discipline, I really do mean getting to something I already hinted at, focusing on the behaviors that your child is doing right. Um, in general, I'm a behavioral psychologist, so I know reinforcement works better than punishment. Reinforcement is anything that increases behavior. Punishment is anything that decreases behavior. Punishment sometimes works really well. If like if your child runs into the street, you yank them back and like you tell them this is not allowed, it hurt them a little bit, they're gonna stop the behavior right away. But it can also have some nasty side effects. If you overuse it, it's gonna stop working. It might lead to rebellious children. We don't want to rely on punishment for a variety of reasons. So in a good discipline system will focus on reinforcement more than it focuses on punishment. What do I mean by that? What reinforcers do we have? Parental attention is a huge, very, very, very powerful tool when talking to children. And this is all children. Children like their parents' attention. Think about when you're on the phone with your friend and what happens. What are your kids like? It's always at that moment that your kids are like, "Mommy, let me tell you all about my day that I didn't want to tell you about for the last hour." When they can't have your attention, they want it. That's very normal. So we're going to talk all about this in a minute, but other reinforcers can be physical, sticker charts, prizes, things like that. If there's a specific kind of behavior that you need to get fixed, instead of saying, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, thinking about what can I ask you to do that might be physically impossible to do with, like, let me give an example instead of getting caught up in words. If I want my child to stop sucking their thumb, making a sticker chart for every day that they keep their thumb out of their mouth, and then rewarding every 4 or 5 days that they go. And I don't like consecutive days. I'd much rather be able to reward if Monday goes well and then Wednesday goes well. Just counting to 4 and then giving that a prize works much better, because you don't want to penalize a kid for, let's say they did well for 7 days but they weren't in a row. That might feel a little bit punishing, but I think that gets back to knowing development and what's appropriate at what ages. Because going a week without doing something inappropriate for a younger kid is going to be way harder than going a couple hours for a couple days in a row. So when you use a sticker chart or a prize, I like to start it in a way that they'll definitely get the prize easily the first time, and then make it a little bit more and more difficult. And I also use the sticker charts or prizes very sparingly, because it's very hard to be consistent. I guess that brings us to my next point, that a key factor in things working is being consistent. So if you're going to have a chart but you're not going to fill it out, or you're going to forget, or they get to 4 and they don't get a prize, you just totally undermined yourself. So buy the prize in advance, have it ready, have it waiting, and have the chart in a place that you're going to remember, and make sure everybody's on board and talking about it before. If not, it's just going to be so hard to be consistent, and consistency is one of the keys to discipline in both a positive way and in making even small punishers work. So we'll get back to that again. So points. It depends how old, but like, I think it's fine to say, okay, you need to be in bed by 11, and every time you are in bed by 11, you get 5 points. And, it could be like deciding what the rewards are going to be in advance. It could be going out to eat, or, trip for ice cream, or extra snack money. I don't love using money, but if it's for a specific thing. Like, I think sticker charts are the younger version, but keeping a notebook and keeping track. There are actually a lot of good apps. I don't remember the name of the apps that I really like, that both the parent and the child can log into. So basically track certain behaviors that if you're, providing homework done before 8, something like kid can log on and then you can be like, wow, you completed your homework, you know, 7 times in the last 10 days before 8 o'clock. That's amazing. Because of that, you get agreed upon prize. And it can be a thing. It doesn't, like, it can be an experience. It doesn't have to be a thing. I think with older kids, a lot of times people get stuck on, well, what do I give them? They have everything. So experiences, like special time or.
You can out of the system because I find that essentially it's been like how many experiences you talk about, and then sometimes they didn't pick up on it and they do need the start or the reinforcement and it's hard.
Yeah, so that's actually not my primary. I'm throwing that in there, and I think it is a very effective technique, so it was worth mentioning. If you're going to do it, you got to do it very consistently, and at the beginning, make it easy, and then stretch it. So 3 days, then 5 days, then 7 days, then 10 days, then 20 days. And then after 20 days, you're done. The kid is doing whatever you wanted them to do, hopefully. Like, what?
Finish?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Maybe that is this turned into like, I'm just going to be good just to get a prize. Like my daughter's 10. She came home the other day and she's like, I was good and I behaved the whole week. Can you buy me blah, 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 blah.
No.
I don't need to buy you something.
No, you're right.
You were good.
Yeah.
You need to be good because you need to be
a
good person.
But I also think that sometimes you need external motivation. Like, it's okay. We do it for ourselves. Or I don't know. I think, like, maybe this is a behavioral psychologist talking, but I think it's a good idea. Like, I'm doing that for my adult patients too, to say, every time you do your homework, every time you do your homework, you should reward yourself. You should go into you get to eat ice cream for doing whatever you were doing. And we do. Like, okay, I lost this amount of weight. I'm going to go buy a new outfit. Like, that's okay. We do that. But the idea is sometimes you need a little extra motivation. So even though the goal is internal motivation, like providing external motivation to get to internal motivation is totally acceptable as long as it's not the final goal, as long as you stretch it every time. And you're right, being good is something that you want kids to do. But if they need a little extra help, then why not?
Does the reinforcement schedule matter? In other words, I know from psychology talking about variable ratio.
No, you don't want variable ratio. You want it to be consistent. You want like them to get it every time they do what they're saying. Because if not, then it's not going to be as effective because they're not going to know whether or not they're getting the reinforcer. So we don't want that. So it does matter. But you do want to stretch it. No, one thing at a time. Otherwise, you won't do it. You won't do it. As a parent, you won't do it. You're a person. People cannot handle this, especially if you have more than one kid, which most people do. Like, you're not going to be able to do it. So one thing, it has to be easy. There has to be a reminder. Like, I know my daughter came home with like a thing from school now that she has to like, I have to do the homework of marking off when she like says brachot every like 5 times a day, and I have to write which ones, and it's so annoying for me, but I don't want to take it away from her. But like, okay, so I'm doing it, but it's supposed to last 2 months. I don't know. I can't imagine that in 2 months this is still going to be going on, and that's like school imposed. That's the only motivation. I would never have set up a chart like that. It's way too complicated. Simple. Keep it simple.
How long did you get? Like, how many, like, the 5 months?
I would start it small. Always start it small so that they get it and they like taste this is what it could be, and then make it a little bit harder, and then make it a little bit harder. And for a 5-year-old, the sticker is by itself a little reinforcing. It's like, oh, I got a sticker. Older kids not as much, but like a little bit. You're right on the border, and it depends on the kid. But yeah, okay. So, but then it's about the prize and choosing the prize and having it in advance. We have a Shopkins chart going on in my house now. Like the thing for a little bit. So let's talk about how you can correct misbehaviors using your attention, because that's really what I I think it's easier because you always have it on you. And you don't have to go buy things or set up a chart or whatever. So I think it's very useful, probably for all kids, but especially kids that you're having trouble with misbehavior, is setting up special time. And I call it special time because I work with little kids, and I took this from parent-child interaction therapy, which works for little kids, ages 2 to 7, but even older kids, like one-on-one time is very, very valuable to children. It's also hard. Okay, great, special time. I'm talking about 5 minutes a day. That's non-contingent, meaning you're not pulling it away if they do something horrible, like, they kick you. They're still getting special time as long as they don't kick you in special time. And one-on-one, which also is one of the reasons why it's difficult, because if you have other kids or you have other things going on, finding that 5 minutes might be hard. So it's a short amount of time, and most parents tell me, oh, I can do 5 minutes a day. And then when, we're looking over how often they did it, they're like, well, I couldn't do it that day. This happened. But it's huge. I think it's one of the biggest things you can do to prevent misbehavior. Give your child that time. The main goal of that amount of time is relationship enhancement. It's developing a really strong bond between you and your child. And when your child values their relationship with you, he or she is way more likely to listen to you when you ask for something. So it's more like this is, the vitamin that you're going to give your child so that they won't get sick later. It also, just throwing this out there and we'll go back to it, allows a parent to use differential attention later. So if your attention is a powerful tool and you pull it away, that's really, it's a little bit punishing. Kids don't like that. So once children value your attention, you can use that in a little bit of a manipulative way, but I'm okay with manipulative if the goal is to get us where we need to be. To pay attention to the positive things they do and not pay attention to the negative things they do. But if a child knows that they're being ignored, it doesn't feel very good, and they're not going to want that. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how to create that situation where special time is useful and what to do in that special time. So during special time, again, older kids, it's going to be a little bit different because sometimes it is, but it's still, but the basic rule still applies. The basic number one idea is to follow your child's lead. So it's their time. It's not your time. It's not for you to play the game that you want to play with them. Like magnet tiles are fun, but they don't want to play magnet tiles. You're not playing magnet tiles. You're doing what they want. The things you're not going to do during this time. So you set up 5 minutes a day because I told you to, and you're committed and you're ready. In order to follow a child's lead, there are some behaviors that are good to avoid during special time, and these are really taken from ideas from play therapy to create good relationships. These are tools that play therapists do. When I'm in therapy, I always tell parents, obviously, I know there's sometimes that you have to use these behaviors, but for relationship enhancement purposes, what I've learned as a therapist doing these is the amount of times I use questions or commands has dramatically increased since I do this a lot during therapy, and it's definitely changed my own relationship with my kids, that it helps a lot. So the first behavior you want to avoid is questions. So questions demand an answer from a child. And once you're doing that, you're taking the lead away from them. And I know that sometimes, maybe it's different with other people's kids, but I know that in general, you pick up your kids from school and say, how was your day? And they're like, fine, whatever. It's a little bit overwhelming to get questions thrown at you. Kids don't really always like it, and it takes the lead away from them. So avoiding questions, at least during special time, is important. Also avoiding commands, because commands, if I ask you to pass me that cup and you don't want to, then special time totally stops being fun. And again, I'm taking the lead away from you. That if this is your time, that's a time when, as a child, you should be in control, not playing what, as a parent, you want them to play. It is, and I know it's like, what else do you say if you're not asking questions? You're not getting commands.
Yeah,
I'll tell you, we're getting to what you should be. The next slide is all about what you should be doing.
I do it like right before bed. And just to start it, I'll say, oh, tell me your favorite part of it.
Yeah.
And then once they start, I let them go. But
yeah. So I've with my own kids, I know I like latch on to now things like, oh, today was gym day, just a statement, and they're like, yeah, we played four corners. Like it's definitely something that I've struggled with that same thing. Like, what do you do if you're not saying how was your day? But at the same time, I know I've been on the other end. Sometimes I work here late. I come into my house and I drop my stuff, and my husband's like, "How was your day? What did you do?" And I'm like, give me 5 minutes." Like, so I feel like we do that to our kids a lot. We just ask for a lot, like a lot of information, and we don't wait for them to give us what they want. So sometimes giving those prompts in a more subtle way can help that. We also want to avoid criticism. That's really a general rule, but criticism is anything that tells a child what not to do. So, don't do that. It doesn't work that way. Even those subtle forms of criticism during special time, that's something as a parent you want to avoid. Instead, there are positive ways to say it. So if you want to correct something that they're doing wrong, saying something like it goes this way, which provides information, but it's not critical of what they're doing or what they're actually saying. So, okay, what's left? There's no skills left to use. What are you going to say to your kids? There are things. So, in PCIT, we use an acronym called the PRIDE skills. PRIDE stands for praise, reflections, imitation, description, and enjoyment. And I'm going to go through them all, so don't worry. Okay, so starting with praise. Praise, I think, is the most important one. I can also send out the slides, by the way, if anybody wants them. So praise is a very, very, very powerful reinforcer. And there are two types of praises. There's unlabeled praises, which are non-specific, things like good job, nice work. They make a kid feel good. All praises do. Enhance your self-esteem. Forget about kid feel good. They make anybody feel good. People like being praised. It builds self-esteem. It builds positivity. But what we also know about praise is that it increases the behavior that it follows. So if, the office manager brought me a glass of water every day, and I said, "Thank you so much for giving me this glass of water. It really made my day so much better." I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow there's a glass of water on my desk. Because, sorry to pick on you. But, so, the more specific you can be, the more likely it is that your praise can actually change your child's behavior. It definitely requires more work because it's not just about responding, it's about thinking preemptively, like, what do I want to get out of this interaction? What do I want to praise my child for? But I know that when I use these in therapy, it's really about getting the parents used to using specific praise, because we generally don't. Often what we do instead is, when our children do the right thing, what do you do? I don't know, you like back away slowly and like don't say anything. Like when your kids are playing nicely in the next room, you're like, okay, I'm gonna go make dinner. You don't often walk in and say things like, really great job playing nicely, guys, and then go make dinner. So I do, but it's because I do this, and that's what psychologists do. They use it all the time. But I know that that's pretty not normal. It also works. At the beginning, it used to make them stop playing and see what I was doing, but it doesn't anymore. They got used to it. They're like, okay, that's what mommy was great. So, and there's actually research that shows, like, if a kid is building a tower and I say, "Thank you so much for giving me the blue block," "Oh, thanks again for giving me the blue block," I'm going to end up with a tower of all blue blocks. So you can use praise to shape a child's behavior really subtly. Thank you for coloring in the lines, versus if I just say thank you for coloring, like really nice job. Do you like that I colored a tree? Do you like that that I'm sitting nicely? Do you like that I'm coloring? Do you like, the kid doesn't know. It feels good, but they don't know what you liked. So telling them what you liked is more likely to increase what you like. So really, really important, and something in special time when you're playing with kids that you can really work on by being specific. Like, instead of, my line is always, so instead of saying thank you to your kids, thank you for. Like, thank you for what? Thank you for handing this to me. Thank you for using your manners. Thank you. Like, thank you should always be followed by a qualifier telling someone what you liked about their behavior. And this doesn't only, it also works on spouses. I don't know if I should mention that. Definitely, totally does. I've had patients who learn this with their kids that'll like do it back at me, like, I really appreciate you being flexible. And it's like, oh, thank you. They like that. Wait, hold on. I know what you're doing. It works even if you know. So I really like that it works even if you know, because everybody likes praise. So praise people specifically, and that can help change behavior. So the other pride skills also really reinforcing, so I'm going to mention them because I don't want to skip over them. But the R in pride, so P is for praise, the R is for reflecting. That means repeating or paraphrasing what a child says. So this gets back to, what do you say? A child says, I had gym today, and you say, you had gym today. It sounds like a ridiculous thing that won't get you anywhere. It is actually a really great tool, and the truth is, we learned it in grad school, and we learned interviewing, like how to get people to talk more to you. And I didn't think it would work with adults then, and initially I didn't think it would work with kids. It works for both. When you repeat the end of someone's sentence, they tend to keep talking. So I promise, try it. It totally works. It also has an added value that it makes you listen to your child's conversation in a way that you might not have. You can't just say, uh-huh, yeah, okay. When you get good at it, you can also sort of be like listening with halfway and repeating the end of their conversation, but I still think it's a valuable skill. It shows your child that you're listening to them because you're literally repeating what they say. And it can also improve speech. For kids who have a speech problem, they use the wrong word tense. They say, oh, my friend brings this for me. And you say, oh, your friend brought it for you. Like, you've corrected it and reflected at the same time, and now they don't feel criticized, but you don't have to say you used the wrong word. You're just repeating what they say. So feels awkward, it gets natural very, very quickly, and it's a really effective way to get a kid to keep talking. Then you have imitation. So imitation is doing the same thing as your child is doing. If they're building a tower with 3 blocks, some parents I'll have in my office, this gets back to developmental appropriateness, will be building like this crazy rocket ship with all the pieces, and like it's amazing and great. But it also, how do you think that feels for your kid? Doesn't feel so good. Like, when you're like making this masterpiece art project and they're like can barely write their name. So to keep it on their level, imitation is a good way to show approval for what they're doing, and also help you in understanding that developmental piece without reading a book on parenting. Like, this is where you're at, so I'm going to follow your lead. So then we also have descriptions. So descriptions is when you describe what a child is doing. Something like, you're drawing a sun, or, you're building a tower. Just describing. You're really the sports commentator in this case of your child's actions. You're describing what they're doing. So again, it allows them to lead, which is our #1 rule, that we want to follow our child's lead, children's leads. It shows approval, and it helps them pay attention to what they're doing. Because if you're describing what they're doing, it's keeping them on task. And again, there's research showing that parents who use descriptions have children sustain their attention more than if they don't. So it helps keep a kid. I use descriptions for my kids' homework. I use all this for my kids' homework. Praising, like good reading. Oh, you're doing your math homework now. It just helps them stay on task. And then the final rule for special time is really enjoyment. That express enjoyment when you're playing with your child. It can be if they're smiling, touch, tone of voice, but show your child that you like spending time with them. So, any questions about the pride skills? I'm going to keep going, but I know there's so much information.
Sorry. So, if your children need your attention, does that mean they're not getting enough of it? That's a few little girls, and I feel like if I'm needing my attention at the same time, and that's what was so much stress stuff. And I don't know, like, it's just people who spend hours on video, and now you can do it, and it's like.
So I can tell you that that's actually really one of the things I like about special time. It's this focused attention. And even I really say that special time is a great thing by itself, but it's also a good way to learn these skills so that you can use them outside of special time. So that way, when you're in the grocery store, like when you get that special one time, it's great. But it's even better if like you're able to show them how much it means to you that they're with you. So using some of these skills and using like the non-special time, like using these skills outside of special time to show them like how much, like how to give them as much attention as you can, even though you're also shopping for stuff.
I know what I'm saying. Like, let's say they had their special fund.
Yeah.
And now they want more when it's
Yeah.
not appropriately fun.
Yeah.
Like,
no, but I think using these kinds of skills makes that special time more rewarding for them, a lot more, because the focus is on me. With older kids, it might be not, you don't want to sort of do quite as many, let's say, praises or descriptions or reflections, but you do, by older kids, I mean like, the 8, 9, 10 up-year-olds. But you still want to use some of these skills. And, like it might mean like, okay, we're taking out a board game, we're playing for 5 minutes. We might have to be a little bit longer until the game ends, but giving them that one-on-one time. And this helps misbehavior because it pays attention to it helps you pay attention to what your child is doing right. It helps you keep it positive. Very little negativity in using praises, reflections, descriptions. You're not going to say, I hate the way you're building that tower. If you do, that's totally not in line with special time to do that. But another way that it helps misbehavior more specifically is I focus a lot on positive opposites. So let's say I have a child who's hitting her sister, and I don't want her to hit her sister, but I also want to keep it positive, and I know about the pride skills, and I'm trying to figure it out. So I'm going to think about what is the positive opposite of the behavior I want to stop. So what could be a positive opposite of hitting? Yeah. So what can I praise? Like keeping your hands to yourself, maybe, or like keeping your hands to your sides. A kid can't hit if their hands are on their sides. So every time I see that kid like keeping their hands in their own space, I can say, great job keeping your hands in your own space. Even if they had no intention of hitting in that moment, that's something I'm building towards. So if I know that hitting is a problem, it's constant, great job keeping, everybody's doing a great job of keeping their hands to themselves. Really nice job keeping your hands to yourself. Instead of waiting for that moment when they hit, and then what are you going to do? Then you need to respond. So it's being on the offensive instead of on the defensive by saying, okay, what do I need to do now to prevent the behavior that I know I don't want to see? It is definitely more work. Or if I know I'm dealing with a lot of whining and I don't want to, I don't want it because whining happens to drive me crazy. A great job talking nicely. I love how you're using your big girl voice. If you have a kid who has a tendency to run away, like great job standing near me. But you can use this even before they do the positive thing. You can do it like you haven't even left the house and they haven't had a chance to run away and they're even thinking about it and you're like, great job standing near me. And they're like sort of stop and they're like, okay, yeah, stay near me. Yeah, I'll do that. Like you can use this. And then descriptions and reflections are also a really good way to express this. Approval, not only praise.
You're saying you're specifically for the challenges. Is there
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't know. I always think it's nice to say good manners. I think that even, I don't know, maybe it's just me. I like being praised. I like when people tell me when they like what I do. So, and I'm a grown up. So like as a kid, it's just very valuable. I don't know, when your kids come home and they're like, the teacher said something nice about me. It feels so good. Like they love that. So you're just playing into what the child wants, but it's also getting what you want. So you get 2 in 1, I think.
Point 6 is constitute that reinforcement, and then they don't get that reinforcement anymore. That causes them to be so used to only doing it with followed by
I don't think that that's the reason why kids, like, I think it definitely has an impact, but I don't think they're going to stop cold turkey if they don't get it. And I also think good teachers are very good at providing a lot of praise. There's actually a correlate, like a teacher-child interaction therapy that we sometimes train people in also, so teaching the teacher how to do this. But often when I work with teachers, they're like, yeah, don't worry, I give a lot of praise. The specificity might be a new concept for them, but their kids are getting praise for doing the right thing in school. So generally, there are always exceptions to everything. But so, okay, what do you do when your kid still misbehaves? So we still have some tools for that, some that even have to do with parental attention. So ignoring is a very, very, very powerful tool. So now you're doing special time and you're using the pride skills and you're using them effectively, and now your kid starts to whine or cry or want something. What can you do? You can really use ignoring. Ignoring is a huge tool in a parenting toolbox. And when I mean ignoring, I don't mean telling your kid, I'm ignoring you now, because if you tell them that, you're giving them attention. I mean, like, you're playing nicely in their building. You're like, great job building that tower. You're doing such a nice job. I love how you're building. And then they start throwing a block at the wall. It's not hurting anyone. If it's aggressive or destructive, don't use ignoring. But if they're doing something that's like you just don't want them to do, literally turn it back. And then they start building nicely again, and you say something like, great job building. So you're teaching them that difference between you do something inappropriate and I'm going to ignore it. But as soon as you do something neutral or positive, you have my attention and my full attention right back. Things to know about ignoring. It can be used for all attention seeking, or I like to call it attention getting, because it's not always seeking attention, but it always gets attention. Behaviors, so like whining or crying or back talk, those are typically used to get attention. But things that are aggressive or destructive are typically not only attention getting, and even if they are, you can't always ignore them. So don't ignore them. Ignored behaviors get worse before they get better initially, not every single time, but if you're using ignoring for the first time, you can expect that behavior will get worse. So only ignore a behavior that you can continue ignoring through the worst of it. If you ignore for 10 minutes and then you give in, it teaches your kids to whine or cry for longer, because it teaches them they need to whine for 10 minutes before they get a response. So that's the opposite of what we want. So you really have to follow through. Yeah, you can do that. Yeah. But if you're going to use ignoring, like, then you got to really, like, ignore. Really do it, like, and a lot of times parents will tell me, well, they don't know that I'm ignoring them. I'm like, yes, they do. They will figure it out. Trust me, they'll learn. hmm I have a very high tolerance for ignoring stuff. So it's not about me, it's about, could you ignore that?
So I went to parents meeting and she told me about it. I was, and then that's interesting.
So if you can't, yeah.
That's so silly.
Yeah. So
then I did the soap and it stopped. It stopped. And that week, and I went against the week, because you know what? She said I was crazy.
So,
and I was like, you know what? It just has to leave the house.
So if that's the time where I wouldn't use ignoring. If you can't handle it, then it's not up to me to decide for you to ignore it. So again, it's not about me, it's about you.
Oh, is it about?
It's about what the parent can handle. Because I have a very high tolerance for these things, because I see distracted kids a lot. So whatever, I don't mind. But if it matters to you, then it matters to you. So tying these tools together, I just want to make sure to tie it together. You really want to be able to use that positive attention plus ignoring, which I just was talking about. That allows you to pay attention to acceptable behavior and then pull your attention away for unacceptable behavior. And at the beginning, it does turn into this like push-pull, where you're like really focused on your kid and then you're pulling back, and then they do something again and like you're right back with them, and then they throw something else and you're like, okay, pull away. Like it is this push-pull, and then they get the hint and they don't like being ignored, so they stop being ignored. So this ignoring only works if you have a positive relationship with your kid and they want your attention. So that's where the special time really does come in, where you want to create an environment where your kids want your attention, and by wanting your attention, that's what they'll notice when they're being ignored, and they don't want that, so they want to change that. situations that can't be ignored. Any discipline technique you use needs to be really consistent, and that is hard because if you do things inconsistently, your kids are not going to know when you're going to discipline them and when you're not. So you need to do whatever you choose to do it consistently. You have to be willing to follow it. What I like to say is discipline really needs to be a brick wall, not a rubber band. If it's a rubber band, then your kids will just stretch it till it breaks. But if you respond the same way every single time, the same way if you touch fire, every single time you touch fire, you will burn. It doesn't matter if you touch it once or you touch it 700 times, you're going to burn. That's how you want discipline to be. You want discipline to be that brick wall. Because that's really hard, because as people, sometimes you have things that are just getting in the way. Choose your battles. And I mean that, like, I will use the positive stuff maybe 20 times before I use more negative discipline, because I know that it's, if something else is going on, or if I have something on the stove, I can't necessarily take time to discipline, so I just won't start that process. But when I start that process, then my kids know what they will be able to expect because I'm doing it consistently. So really think about what really matters to you, because predictability is helpful for parents, and it also provides transparency. Like, I think that transparency is a good thing. So they know that every time I hit my sister, I'm going to sit in timeout. It doesn't matter if it's, if I'm going to miss the bus, it doesn't matter anything. This is just what's going to happen. Then they will learn. And they'll know. And there's a certain level of comfort to knowing what exactly will happen in any situation. Kids like when they know things. So some discipline options, and I have literally 3 minutes, that might work. I think any discipline option can work if used consistently, but natural consequences are great. Sometimes, if your kid skips dinner, then they're going to be hungry. If you give them snacks later, then they're going to learn that it's worth it to skip dinner because they get snacks. But kids don't starve from missing a meal. They will survive. I know that food becomes like a very heavy thing with parents and children. Kids will eat eventually, I think. There's also, or if a kid refuses to put on their coat, if you want to let them be cold, that's okay. But again, it's about the consistency. If you do this once and not again, then that's going to be, it's going to come back and not work as well. There's also logical consequences. Those are imposed by teachers or parents. Those are the if-then statement. If you don't do your homework, then you have to go to bed early. That would be a sort of logical consequence, technically. But when there's not such a link, but you make the link. It needs to be reasonable, and that gets again back to developmental appropriateness. The punishment needs to fit the crime. Taking away a kid's video game system for a month for them staying up too late one night is probably not fair. They're probably going to rebel. But the best consequences are immediate, or they don't have to literally be applied in that minute, but they should be stated in that minute with the connection between the punishment and the crime, so to speak. That's when it works best. And the child should also feel like it's reasonable. Like, as much as kids don't like punishments, they do have a good idea of what they think is fair and not. So that's something that if you're comfortable with, it's totally okay to decide in advance with the kid, especially if it's an ongoing problem. Timeouts also can be very effective, and I actually use them for younger children, but they're only effective if they're ended by the parent. The timeouts where you say, go to your room and come out when you're ready, those tend to not be as effective as the ones where the parents decide when they're over. And setting a timer that a kid can hear is also not quite as effective, because then the timeout is ended by the timer, not by you. So even if you're doing 5-minute timeouts, and then you look at your clock and you say, okay, timeout is over. Also, I've noticed a lot of people who do timeout will give a lot of extra attention to kids during timeout. No, you have to stay in the chair. No, don't move. That's attention. So timeout is hard to do right, but can be done right as long as you're not giving that extra attention and it's ended by the parent. So some things to think about. Yeah, you stand by the door and hold the door. Yeah, you have to. Timeouts are not a chance for you to like do something else. You have to be on. Well, yeah. So things to avoid really quickly. Sorry. Giving kids extra attention for misbehavior. I told you don't do that. Like that's more attention. Using ignoring or to stay on task is effective. Like during discipline, you really want to only give them, that as little as you possibly can. Teaching a child to respond only to a raised voice is another thing to avoid. Like, oh, if I ask you, please get your jacket, and you can ignore me, but if you say, please get your jacket, then you have to listen. So you don't want your kid to learn that difference between raised voice and neutral tone because they'll never listen to neutral tone. Giving multiple warnings. This is your last chance. Go get your jacket. And then, this is your last chance. Go get your jacket. If you're going to say it's your last chance, it's your last chance. Get back to the consistency. That ties into the next one, lack of follow through. After the warning, do what you say. And decide if you can do what you say. If you can't do what you say, don't say it. I know that's sometimes hard, but that's why this kind of discipline requires a lot of forethought. And also avoid power struggles. There's no debates. This is what I like. The explanation should happen before you start the discipline. Like, if you don't do this, then, there will be consequences, and talk about the consequences before you tell them, like, look, now there is consequences. Otherwise, you're just going to end up in this battle. So, skip this one. I think everything. Some final words. I think reinforcers are stronger than punishers, and positive attention is a huge reinforcer. So learning to use that right, I think, is one of the biggest tools that as parents we have to correct misbehavior. Labeled praise can preemptively deal with most forms of misbehavior, and any discipline technique can be effective if you use it consistently. So things to keep in mind. Thank you all for coming, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Before people leave, thank you all very much for coming. We have stress balls for you to take. You can take some for your kids. We also have pens, and you're welcome to take those too. And finally, certainly not least, I don't know how many of you know about parent-child interaction therapy, but the way the treatment works and the way the program works is that Dr. Galanti, or one of her associates, is actually at least in our office, in a room and observing the parent interacting with the child. The parent has a bug in their ear and is getting coached on how to do these skills live with their kids. So 1 hour of treatment for that, the parent learns a ton of material. It's extremely effective, which is why we built a special facility for it. We do offer it here, and there are a couple places in the New York area as well. So just to keep informed about that, and hope you are all signed in and you're on our mailing list, and we'll keep in touch with you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Let me think about it, and I'll email whoever it is. Yeah, get their email. Wait. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so my daughter's still in.
Wait, let me.
Actually,
No, let me make sure it's not being recorded. Is this being recorded?